Welcome back, everyone. Glad to see you again. What we will be doing today is actually putting the principles we talked about in the last lecture into practice. So I'm going to give you some very specific ways of putting some of those principles into practice using some of the work that we've done at the Center on Literacy and Deafness, where we've done some studies and developed an intervention for vocabulary for young deaf and hard of hearing children. So we're hoping, I'll talk a little bit today actually about why deaf and hard of hearing children have trouble learning vocabulary, why it's really important for us to actually teach them vocabulary. And then by the end of it, I hope you'll be able to plan your own vocabulary units. So this is not the best slide in the world, but this shows you how deaf children are typically doing in their vocabulary development. You could see that their vocabulary development from our assessments, we've assessed about 300 deaf children around the country, and their expressive vocabulary is at least one standard deviation below the mean. You could see in the fall it's a little lower, in the spring it's a little higher. They're making some progress, but not enough. That's quite a long way to be behind. And that is definitely going to influence their reading later on. Now, our purpose was not to develop reading vocabulary. Our purpose has been to develop oral vocabulary, because what we want is to develop children's entire lexicon. We want to make them into word learners so that later when they come to reading and encounter that vocabulary in print, they will know what it means. Because it's not sufficient to be able to just decode a word. You have to be able to have a meaning for it and see how it fits into the context. And so it has to be in your lexicon, in your vocabulary lexicon, in your head, if you will. So we're definitely talking about oral vocabulary, not print vocabulary today. So why are deaf and hard of hearing children delayed? Well, one obvious reason is that they are not able to access the vocabulary that everybody uses around them, right? They often have an impoverished vocabulary environment because they're not hearing everything that everyone says all their waking hours. They're often in poor acoustic environments where they cannot overhear what's being said. They're not hearing the exact sounds of the new words. It takes concentration for them to hear everything. They may not always be able to concentrate. But another reason is that we have adults who engage in what we call linguistic overprotection. We think, oh, the child does not know these words, so we better use simpler words. Now, we know that that might happen more with adults who are signing, but it also happens with adults who are working with oral children. It's more or less the idea that let's not use a complex vocabulary because the child won't understand. But then the problem there is the child gets no exposure to new and varied words, and so he's likely to develop a smaller lexicon, which is going to influence his reading comprehension and overall language comprehension later in his life. Let's stop talking about all these general things and talk about vocabulary instruction for deaf and hard of hearing children. What we've done is developed a program that we're calling Vocabulary for Success. And in a few minutes, we'll see why we use the 4 in there. We, as I said before, work for the Center on Literacy and Deafness. And we adapted an intervention that's called Paved for Success. The authors are Hamilton and Schwanenflugel. It's quite a mouthful, but you can still say it. We designed it as a supplemental intervention for deaf and hard of hearing children in grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. So typically children between the ages of 6 and 8, though we've worked with 9-year-olds also. And you remember how I said you want to center your vocabulary around a theme? So we centered it around science units so that we could follow part of the school curriculum and not pull out children and have them miss out on content. So here are the steps that we follow when we're planning a vocabulary unit. We choose the theme. We chose several themes. When you look at the video that I'm going to show you, you'll see that our theme is dental health. But we have units on bats and the moon and the ocean, for example, all science units. Then we choose 2 related books, one of which is a narrative, and the other one is an expository book. Expository books are nonfiction books. We really focus a lot on the nonfiction books because deaf and hard of hearing children often don't have an opportunity to listen to others reading them nonfiction books. These books should be chosen so that they are at the children's interest level. They are not at the children's reading level because the children do not have to read them. We read them to the children. Once we have the books on the same theme, then we select target words. And as I said before, we try to select tier 2 words. We try to select words that are not just nouns. There is a temptation to just select nouns because those are easily picturable. But we want to select verbs, we want to select adverbs, we want to select adjectives, and we make child-friendly definitions for each of these words because if you'll remember, I talked about having children use words to talk about words. That's a difficult skill for deaf children who are much more likely to want to point and gesture. We want them to use their language to talk about new words because we think this is a better way for them to remember the new words. And then we create picture cards, and you're going to ask yourself, well, how do you picture verbs and adjectives? Well, we do the best we can. We simply want the picture cards to cue the children. They don't have to be exact matches. We learned very early that if we told the children, well, this picture card means amazing, then they would believe it and they would accept it. So we create all these word picture cards. And then, as I said before, when we select the target words, we want to have a combination of words. If we're working with signing children, we have to decide how the words are signed, and we have to use the exact sign. We don't want to use very generic signs. We develop those child-friendly definitions. And so here's an example of the books for our unit on bats. The narrative book is a book called Bat Loves the Night, and the expository book is a book simply called Bats that tells you all about bats. Here are some of the words and definitions that we used for bats. So you'll see very, very clearly that these are actually tier 2 words, or at least we think they're tier 2 words. They don't occur in everyday language. Hang, holding on to something, branch, thumb, fluttering. So, and you could see that the definitions are quite simple and ones that we think the children will understand. The intervention itself then consists of 4 components: fast mapping, interactive book reading, conversation, and then extension activities. And I'll show you an example of each and what they mean and how to do them. Before I do that, I want to show you how we divide this, why we chose these 4 components. We have both explicit and in-context teaching activities, right? So the explicit activities are the fast mapping and the extension activities that we call drill and practice. The in-context activities are conversation, interactive book reading, and extension activities that we call conceptual activities. So if you'll remember in the first lecture, I talked about balancing the explicit and the in-context instruction. And so this is how we do it. We have both activities that are explicit and activities that are in context. So the way we start every unit is by doing fast mapping. And fast mapping is something that children do when they're very young. They notice new words and they attach new words onto new concepts. And they do this very rapidly and very quickly. And so we've developed this fast mapping strategy to help students attach meaning to the novel words. So what we do is we present 3 words, 2 of which are known to the children, and one which is the new word, because we want to teach them that you pay attention to the new word, and also that you will always be successful because there's only one new word in that set. So here's an example of a fast mapping activity. The teacher says, which is the urchin? And then we teach them the metacognitive strategy, right? So that the child knows the word ball, the child knows the word banana. And so urchin is a new word. They're going to point to the picture of the urchin because it's new. And then the teacher says, well, how did you know that? Now, most of the kids in the beginning are just going to shrug their shoulders. But then we say, oh, you knew that this is a ball. You knew that this is a banana. So this new word, urchin, must belong to this picture. This is an urchin. So what we have here is one of our teachers engaging in this fast mapping activity with a student, with a second grader. And you'll notice how she encourages her to think of the strategy and then provides her with the strategy.
I'm going to put down 3 cards. And then I'll say the word, and you show me which card matches the word.
Oh.
All right? Which card says remarkable? That's right. How did you know that was remarkable?
Because
You know what this is.
an apple,
And
a
this
bird.
So this has to be remarkable.
Mhm.
Remarkable means very good and amazing. All right, let's put this word over here.
So after the fast mapping activity, which we do on the very first introduction to the new words, we and notice that there's no way they can be unsuccessful. So it starts the whole activity on a high note. Then we move into interactive book reading, and we have some principles for that. We read each book twice, not immediately one after the other, but over the week period that we're teaching, we have 2 sessions for book readings. We develop competence, abstract, and relate questions for each book, 6 questions for each book, 2 competence, 2 abstract, and 2 relate. And while we're reading, we ask the questions where it's appropriate in the book, and we also draw attention to the new words as they appear in the book. So this is a way of putting the new words in context and also giving children an opportunity to talk about the concepts and the new words through the question discussion that we have over the book. We don't want it to become a testing session, so we are careful. That's why we ask only 3 questions for every reading. The book we read as it's written, because even if they don't understand everything, they are learning and we read it more than once. So here's an example of the competence question, which is taken exactly from the book. The answer can be found in the book. The abstract question is like an inference question, right? Why do you think they're hiding in the coral? A relate question is one that goes back to the child's own experience. And you could see how the teacher has done that. These little fish made one big fish to hide. Have you ever played a game where you have to hide? So you can see that we try to relate it to the book, but we also try to relate that to the child's own life. So now let's take a look at 2 very short videos that show an example of the interactive reading and how the teacher infuses the questions. The first one will show you the teacher asking an abstract question, and the second one will show you the teacher asking a relate question.
Little does he know, huh? When the dentist was done, he stepped out. Now, close your jaws tight, he said, and keep them closed for a full minute. And the fox did as he was told. Then he tried to open his mouth, but his teeth were stuck together. Oh, excuse me, I should have mentioned, said Dr. DeSoto, you won't be able to open your mouth for a day or two. The secret formula must permeate the dentine. But don't worry, no pain ever again. What do you think DeSoto painted on the fox's teeth?
Paint.
What kind of paint would make it
Formula.
some sort of formula? And it makes the jaw
Tight. And he can't even open it.
And we also have different kinds of teeth. You have canines for tearing, right here, incisors for cutting, and molars for chewing. You must look after your teeth. It all begins with brushing. What do you like to chew with your molars?
Food.
What kind of food?
I don't know.
I like to chew potato chips and strawberries. What do you like to chew? Pizza? Soda pop? You don't use your molars for soda pop.
Okay, so I'm going to now show you a video of our teacher engaged in conversation. Notice that she is going to use some acknowledgments and some recasts, but that the conversation with this particular child is really not on dental health. Sometimes the conversations went off topic, and it is valuable to still engage in conversation with children.
Remember when we
Look
first...
at the bandage.
Right, you have a purple bandage on your finger. Why?
I broke my finger. Again.
And so you're wrapping that around to protect it, huh?
Mm-hmm.
How did you break it?
Did I tell you already?
No.
I was on a stair and I was trying to do American Ninja Warrior. And then I fell.
American Ninja Warrior? That sounds dangerous.
It's fun. Have you watched that show?
No.
I'm going to show you a video of a conversation between our teacher and a signing child. Now, this conversation is very focused on dental health, which is the topic of our unit. And the beautiful part of it is that the child brought up herself that she had gone to the dentist. And you'll see again the teacher use acknowledgments and recasts and open-ended questions and some statements. And it's a really wonderful example of a conversation where many of the vocabulary words are included, and it's clear that the child has learned many of these new words, even some words that were not targeted. For example, she tries to use the word tartar, but she also uses bleeding and gums and other words that were part of the unit. So now let's focus on extension activities. This is the fourth portion of our vocabulary for success. We have two kinds of extension activities that we've developed. One that we call drill and practice activities, and the other that we call conceptual activities. So now the drill and practice activities provide repeated opportunities for children to practice the words and to provide the definitions. and it provides repeated opportunities for both receptive and expressive practice. And so we play games like Go Fish and memory games, and we make sure that you set them up in a way where there's lots of opportunities to say the words, to have the children listen to the words, to have the children listen to the definitions. And then we also have conceptual activities where we really extend the concept. So some examples of conceptual activities are, for example, for the ocean unit, we had experiments with salt water, what floats in salt water, how does salt water taste compared to fresh water. In the bats unit, for example, where bats love mangoes, and juicy was one of the target words for one of the children, we brought in a mango, we cut it, we talked about the mango and how it was juicy and why bats would like it, and where the mango grows, and where it would grow on the branch of a tree, for example. So conceptual activities are there to really extend the concept, and also to provide an opportunity to use the words in context. Our final videos are to show teachers engaging in a drill and practice activity, and you'll notice how she takes every opportunity to use the word and the definition and to encourage the child to use the word and the definition when playing. So you can see that there's lots of opportunities to provide repetition. But the repetition is in a fun way, right? It's not rote learning. And a second video where she's engaged in a conceptual activity, where she's able to show, they're doing an art activity, and they are able to talk about various different concepts in the context of that art activity.
You're really good at this. Plaque.
Plaque.
What can you say about plaque?
It's the white stuff in the tea.
Where is it from?
Beverages and food.
Food and drink.
I'm like,
Oh, what is that?
it's what you chew with your teeth.
What's the word?
Molars.
Molars. I don't remember this one. Have we looked at that one?
No.
Plaque. The sticky yellow stuff on your teeth from food and drink. And it's this one. The sticky yellow stuff from food and drink.
So now what you'll see is a video where the teacher is engaged in a conceptual activity. It is an arts and crafts activity, and she's engaging in conversation where she's able to bring in the different words and also provide definitions and target words in a conceptual format.
Okay. Glue it?
Yeah, I think you should glue them so there's space next to each one for the label. Or why don't you find out which of these goes with that picture?
Cool.
Well, that's easy. What does it say?
It says, boil and rinse after brushing.
Do you rinse after brushing with fluoride?
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I rinse with water.
Why?
I don't have fluoride rinse. I have fluoride toothpaste.
So I'm going to wrap up the second lecture by reminding you what you ought to do, right? We select a theme, we select the books for the theme, we select target words from those books, we then create the definitions for the words, make cards that go with the words, start our unit with a fast mapping activity, include interactive book reading of both the narrative book and the nonfiction book, the interaction is around questions that we've created for those books, not too many questions for any book, only 3 questions for any single book reading. We also do conversation, sometimes during the book reading, sometimes during the conceptual activity, sometimes standalone if that what occurs during the session. And then we do both drill and practice activities and conceptual activities. So that's basically the unit at a glance. And in our next session, I'll show you how successful we've been and show you some of the data from some of the children that we've studied.